I had never seen industrial cooling equipment sweat like that. Condensation was running down the sides of the heat exchange units, as if the metal were bleeding cold water. In that control room, the air conditioning was cranked to the max, but the smell of burnt copper and ozone was unbearable. I was on my knees, my tool case open, trying to understand why the temperature gauges on the Lucifer instrument were redlining. Around me, no one spoke. There were 3 men in civilian clothes, but their posture gave everything away. They weren't ordinary scientists. The way they stood still, hands clasped behind their backs, staring at the main monitors, conveyed a military rigidity. One of them, the oldest, held a rosary in his left hand, squeezing the beads so hard his knuckles were white. What scared me wasn't the technical failure. Equipment breaks all the time. What froze my blood was realizing they didn't want to shut down the telescope to prevent component fusion. They preferred to let the machine burn rather than lose a single second of what they were tracking. I looked at the thermal telemetry monitor over the operator's shoulder. The heat reading wasn't coming from the telescope's motors. It was coming from the object they were observing. The heat was coming from the sky. Whatever was out there was hot, and it was looking back. My name is Roberto, and I've worked with ultra-precision refrigeration systems for over 25 years. My career was built in silence, inside. Server rooms for banks, pharmaceutical labs, and military installations, where you sign 3 non-disclosure agreements before passing the gate. I'm not an internet conspiracy theorist. I'm the guy who fixes the AC when the computer controlling the world starts to overheat. To me, the sky has always been just a meteorological issue, something that affects the efficiency of my cooling towers. On November 14, 2023, I received a direct call, bypassing my company's central dispatch. The client was the management of the Mount Graham International Observatory in Arizona. For those who don't know the logistics, getting there isn't a Sunday drive. Swift Trail, Route 366, is an isolated climb full of blind curves and unprotected cliffs that takes you to over 10,000 feet in altitude. It is a place that commands respect and fear, sacred to the Apache people, and, ironically, chosen by the Vatican to house the VATT and the LBT, the Large Binocular Telescope. It is inside this colossal structure that the LUCI instrument operates. The technical acronym is long, but behind the scenes everyone calls it Lucifer. They swear it's just a coincidence of acronyms, but the irony of the church operating a machine named after the fallen angel has always left me with a strange feeling. The work order was vague, citing only critical thermal instability in the primary cryogenic loop. I arrived at the main security perimeter shortly after 11 at night. The mountain air was freezing and thin. Usually the guard shack is occupied by a sleepy local security guard who barely glances at your badge. That night, the atmosphere was that of a military site on high alert. There were movable concrete barriers blocking part of the road, and 2 black SUVs, armored and without license plates, parked in reverse at the entrance of the support building. When I entered the machine room, the silence was unnatural. The resident maintenance crew, people I knew by name and who lived up there, had vanished. The building seemed empty, except for the low hum of transformers and the presence of those men who didn't wear lab coats, but ill-fitting suits under tactical jackets. I didn't waste time with questions and went straight to the compressors. The Lucifer cooling system is a piece of extremely complex engineering, designed to keep infrared sensors at temperatures close to absolute zero, using a mixture of liquid helium and nitrogen. The physics is simple. If the sensor heats up, it generates thermal noise and goes blind. To see the faint heat of distant stars, the telescope's eye needs to be the coldest thing in the universe. My job was to ensure that cold kept flowing, no matter the cost. I connected my industrial laptop to the main panel's diagnostic port and started the scan. Mechanically, the system was flawless. The vacuum pumps were pulsing at the right rhythm, the helium gas pressure was locked at 12 bar, and the expansion valves were open. However, the temperature graphs on my screen were climbing in an exponential curve. That violated the basic laws of thermodynamics. If I was injecting cold and the temperature kept rising, it meant something was injecting heat into the system at a rate far superior to our removal capacity. It wasn't an internal defect. The sensor was absorbing a brutal amount of external infrared radiation. I called the room supervisor, a short, bald man with thin-rimmed glasses and a heavy Italian accent that betrayed his Roman origins. I explained the situation in clear technical terms. I told him the thermal load coming from the lens was unsustainable and that we needed to close the shutter or point the telescope at the dark vacuum immediately, or risk melting the mercury-cadmium telluride sensors. He looked at me with an expression of absolute contempt for my technical concern. With a calm, icy voice, he ordered me to ignore equipment preservation protocols and increase pump power to 120%. He wasn't worried about saving the multi-million-dollar telescope. He was willing to sacrifice the machine to keep the eye open for a few more minutes. That order paralyzed me for a second. Running cryogenic pumps at 120% of nominal capacity isn't just reckless. It's a death sentence in a closed environment. I tried to argue using the biological safety card. I explained that if a high-pressure line ruptured, helium would flood the room, displace all the oxygen, and we would drop dead on the floor without even realizing we were suffocating. The Italian didn't even blink. He took a step forward, invading my personal space, and spoke in a low, monotone voice. He said the physical integrity of the room was irrelevant compared to the observation window, and that the Vatican had contingency funds to cover any material or personal damage. I returned to the console, feeling cold sweat running down my back. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The institutional silence was heavy, oppressive. They had cut all communication with the outside world. The emergency phones on the wall had their cables ripped out, and cell signal repeaters were off. We were in a bubble. From time to time, a young assistant would enter the room bringing printed sheets of paper, likely from an internal secure room. The Italian would read the content, pass the paper to the older man with the rosary, and both would exchange looks of contained terror. I started paying attention not to what they were saying, but to what they were trying to hide. The Italian murmured coordinates and terms in Latin mixed with technical English. I clearly heard the words confirmation vector and orbital deceleration. That wasn't the language of academic astronomy. Astronomers get excited about discoveries. They shout, "Call colleagues, pop champagne." These men were acting like air traffic controllers, monitoring an enemy plane that had just violated airspace. The tension wasn't of discovery. It was of confirmation. They weren't surprised by what was in the sky. They were terrified because their calculation was correct. To comply with the insane order to overload the system, I had to enter the super user mode of the control software, a factory access layer that allows safety limits to be bypassed. Upon doing so, my laptop interface changed, giving me access to variables that are normally hidden from maintenance technicians. I needed to monitor the correlation between mirror position and temperature to prevent an explosion, but I ended up seeing much more than I should have. In the top right corner of the screen, there was a tracking metadata window linked to the cooling system. The observation target had an identification code, 3i Atlas. Below this code, the telemetry data was impossible for any natural object. The spectrum graph showed the object wasn't reflecting sunlight like an asteroid or moon would. It was emitting its own heat, pulsing at regular frequencies. But what made my stomach knot was the orbital dynamics reading. The relative velocity marker was at 0. That is physically impossible for a natural celestial body. Comets, asteroids, and meteors are always in motion, following elliptical or hyperbolic orbits. The only way an object can have 0 relative velocity regarding the observatory is if it is maneuvering to match Earth's rotation. The object wasn't passing by us. It had arrived and parked. It was hovering silently over the northern hemisphere in a perfect geostationary orbit, but without being one of our satellites. The thermal signature indicated something massive, a structure generating enough energy to heat the sensors of a telescope miles away. That wasn't a rock. It was a machine. I stood mesmerized by the red numbers on the screen, trying to process the reality that there was something parked above us. The younger man, the one with the military posture who seemed to be the operations armed security, realized I had stopped typing cooling commands. He approached with quick, heavy steps, the sound of tactical boots echoing on the raised metal floor. I closed the software window in a panic reflex, but I knew it was too late. He had seen the reflection of the data in my glasses, or noticed my altered breathing. He didn't shout or draw a weapon. The violence was cold, bureaucratic, and contained. He placed a heavy hand on my keyboard and slammed my laptop lid shut with force, almost crushing my fingers. With a neutral voice, he asked exactly what I had seen. My throat closed up. I tried to lie, stammering something about checking if the overheating was coming from friction in the azimuth motor bearings. He stared at me for long seconds, his eyes sweeping my face for signs of deception, evaluating if I was a threat that needed to be neutralized right there. The Italian intervened, but not out of kindness. He said dryly that the service was concluded and that I should be removed immediately. The security guard grabbed my tool case, confiscated my backup USB drive that was in my shirt pocket, where I kept error logs, and escorted me to the exit, gripping my arm with unnecessary force, almost dislocating my shoulder. Before being pushed out of the room, I looked at the main monitor one last time. The temperature had stabilized, not because I fixed the system, but because the object out there had reduced its energy emission. It had gone into standby mode. The digital handshake was complete. The descent down the mountain that dawn was the most terrifying drive of my life. I drove checking the rearview mirror compulsively, expecting to see the headlights of black SUVs emerging from the fog to run me off one of the cliffs on Route 366. My mind was desperately trying to find a logical explanation for the code 3I Atlas. I arrived home shaking, locked the doors, and before my courage vanished, went straight to my old astronomy manuals and public databases. Astronomical. Nomenclature is rigid. The prefix I is used exclusively for interstellar objects, visitors coming from outside our solar system. The first was Oumuamua, officially classified as 1I. The second was Comet Borisov, classified as 2I. Both passed through the solar system at high speed and left. The code 3I would mean mandatorily the third confirmed interstellar visitor in science. But the name Atlas carries a weight that isn't random. In mythology, Atlas is the entity that holds up the sky, who carries the weight of the world. And unlike the first two visitors who just passed through, 3I Atlas stopped. The Vatican wasn't using Lucifer to look for a needle in a haystack that night. The observatory structure, the presence of high-ranking clergy, the isolation of the mountain, everything indicated they had a scheduled appointment. They knew the date, the time, and the exact coordinate of arrival. The Lucifer telescope didn't discover the object. It was used to receive it. The Vatican knew they were coming, and on that night in November they arrived. 2 days later, a deposit hit my business account. The amount was 5 times what I would charge for the service, coming from an investment holding company based in Zurich. I tried to access the public observation logs for Mount Graham for that date, but the usage time logs for the telescope had been wiped or listed as maintenance due to high winds. The real proof, however, isn't in what they show, but in what they hide. Since that night, I've dedicated my free time to cross-referencing data from civilian astronomy apps and satellite maps. There is a specific coordinate in the northern hemisphere sky, an apparently empty area, that digital telescope software now skips. If you try to force your equipment toward that direction, the software freezes or automatically recalibrates to the side. They created a digital blind spot, a censorship in the star map itself. 3I Atlas is up there. It makes no noise. It emits no visible light to us. It is a hot shadow parked, invisible to the naked eye, but real. They are erasing the sky pixel by pixel to hide what is coming down. I want you to do a test tonight. Try using any star map app and see if you find any region where the app refuses to load data. What city are you trying to view the sky from? Comment down below if you've already noticed these glitches in the darkness. Subscribe to the channel, because while they try to hide what is out there, we will keep revealing what is in here.